Hello and welcome to episode 15 of Can We Still Be Friends, a podcast that tests the limits of the friendship between two people who mistake movie taste for personal morality. I'm Nate Goss, here with Ryan Ebling. With stores loaded with candy, fake cobwebs, and Christmas decorations, the Halloween spirit is in full swing, so we thought we'd join in by watching a horror classic that neither Ryan nor I had ever seen. The Texas Chain Saw Massacre, directed by Tobe Hooper and released 40 years ago in 1974.
The Texas Chain Saw Massacre is a massively famous movie. It was voted as the third best horror movie on Time Out London's list of the best horror movies, just after The Shining at number 2 and The Exorcist at number 1, both of which are two of our favorite horror films. And just recently it came in at number 5 in a Rolling Stone readers poll. It's also massively infamous as one of the scariest, most shocking, and most scarring horror films. The movie was made for a meager $300,000, but it's grossed over $30 million in its lifetime.
So Ryan and I mustered up the courage to watch this movie. But what did we think? Does it deserve its place up near the top of almost every best horror film list?
Or is it no good like that air gun thing they used to kill cattle, effective but not as good as a sledge? Grab your comfort blanket and listen to this one through your fingers if you have to.
How did you get stuck way out here?
I was at the slaughterhouse.
I got an uncle that works at a slaughterhouse.
Hey, my brother worked there. My grandfather, too. My family's always been in me.
A whole family of Draculas.
So that was a clip, obviously, from the Texas Chain Saw Massacre. Like we said in the intro, neither of us had seen this movie. We both watch horror movies.
Yeah.
So Nate, what was it about this one that kept you from seeing it? Was it intentional? Why hadn't you seen this one?
You know what? I think, to be honest, I didn't really know until recently that it was held in such high regard. I don't know about you. I feel like
I don't know.
I feel like there's the ones that I saw years ago, and I knew that they were important to the genre.
Mm-hmm.
You know, even something like, say, Frankenstein or Dracula, and then the later stuff. I mean, later comparatively, like Shining and Exorcist and things like that. And I knew they had done a lot of remakes of Texas Chain Saw Massacre.
A lot of sequels and
yeah,
remakes.
exactly. And I didn't really know. I mean, so obviously I knew the film existed, but I guess I couldn't really explain why I didn't see it, other than I just really didn't. I never really felt like it was a movie that I had to see. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree. I feel like for a long time the people who talked about it were like the horror movie buffs, and you would see like, you know, those movies that people make like those super detailed toys of, those super detailed like action figure things, like Texas Chain, you know, I don't know.
People collect and things? Like they don't really play with them. They just kind of sit on a shelf.
Yeah.
Like
I feel like Texas Chainsaw was in there with like The Crow, and I was like, okay, so it's like a cult movie.
Sure.
That was one of those more like dare yourself to see it ones,
right?
You know? And I just didn't think anything of that. I didn't really feel like seeing that. But then I don't know when it happened that it started getting the acclaim of being such a seminal horror film and something that really was influential, which, I mean, we'll talk about it later, but after seeing it, I can see why it was.
Yeah, but I feel like it, kind of like what you were saying, I feel like it was always, to me, a horror movie for people who horror fanatics, and I would call myself at best kind of a casual horror fan. I like the genre. I really only like watching it around this time of year,
but I won't watch it unless I hear things. Like, there is nothing about just the idea of a horror movie that makes me want to go see it. Like, it has to be whoever I trust. So like, if I hear something special, it has to be
a bit of an exceptional horror movie for you to even consider going to see it or to watch it at home. And I don't even think I've been to see a horror movie in the theater. You know, I saw a lot. I snuck in a lot at high school, and I saw a lot through college, but it's really been a long time since I really even considered myself someone following horror, you know, on a regular basis.
Yeah, I saw The Descent in theaters, which was not, I didn't like it as much as everybody. Like, it's one of those ones that'll make the list too. Yeah. You know, but I didn't enjoy that one very, very much. But there's another thing about Texas Chainsaw that I always had, like, as from childhood, had like this aversion to the slasher films. And really the only ones that I was aware of, and the ones that got a lot of popularity were Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street.
Right.
And as a kid, like, I was just really scared of horror movies. Like whenever I was in the video rental place and I would see like a horror movie in the new releases. I like felt like trapped. Like I was like, I don't go in the horror section for a reason. Why is that there?
Oh, those boxes were terrifying when
The
you were
boxes,
a kid
but
in the video store.
there was also my video store. One of the ones that was like locally owned. It wasn't a Blockbuster or anything. They always had like the big cardboard. I remember Candyman was one that had like a mirror on it, and I had no idea what the mirror was or anything, but it scared me to death. And they even had like this big, like I think it was for Bram Stoker's Dracula, the like a arch, like a gated arch that was like super scary to me too.
It seemed like the horror movies
department.
they put so much into the video store to really get you to notice them and to see them.
And I remember I didn't know anything about Friday the 13th, like the hockey mask thing. I was not aware that was from that movie one time. And so we were in the grocery store and like the Halloween costumes were out. And I saw one of the masks and I was like, cool, a hockey goalie. And I like put it on and like stood like I thought a hockey goalie would stand. And I was like, Mom. And she like thought I was standing threateningly, like dressed. And it like scarred me to like, no, I didn't think, I don't like those movies.
I just like hockey.
Yeah. And so I think ever since then I've had a natural aversion to the slasher genre.
Yeah.
So then on top of the fact of what we were saying about Texas Chainsaw, that like, you know, it seemed like a horror movie for horror fans, of which a caliber I'm not.
Sure.
On top of being a slasher film with all this childhood baggage I associate with it, it wasn't going to be at the top of my list to see.
And I think I kind of agree with you where the slasher genre was never one that I sought out with horror. I've seen Friday the 13th, I've seen Nightmare on Elm Street and Halloween and Scream and those as well. And for whatever reason, those actually, it might be a totally different reason that I didn't like them. They never actually did it for me. Like I never was really all that scared of them. It was the paranormal stuff that freaked me out, or the stuff that was more psychological horror, like The Shining and like Exorcist, the two that we've already mentioned, that really actually got to me. And then there was the really sort of hyper slasher stuff that came out later, and it just had no appeal to me, like Saw and Hostel, and it was. I think I saw bits of Saw, but it just never it never scared me to begin with, and then the idea of just watching tons and tons of mutilation and gore and not even getting that horror effect was kind of like, it's not for me, you know?
Yeah. I don't know how much of it was his childhood trauma, but I wasn't really looking forward to seeing this movie.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I was looking forward to seeing it to fill in that gap, I guess, of seeing it on these lists and being like, I can check this one off the list.
That's the only reason I wanted to watch it. Like, and it was a pretty 50-50 childhood trauma versus film knowledge.
Sure. But that being said, I mean, I do love watching horror movies this time of year. And so
I agree.
To just give it a chance, it was a perfect time. And I was definitely, before I watched it, I was in the mood. Like I ramped myself up for it.
Were you?
Yeah. I was kind of like, all right, it's going to be Friday night. I planned it out. I was like, it's going to be Friday night. I think, my wife was going out with a friend that night, so I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna be by myself. Let's do this. Let's actually get scared.
Yeah.
And so I kind of psyched myself up for it, and I was ready. Yeah.
All right. Well, then let's talk about that Friday night, that fateful Friday night, where that lonely Friday night. How did it go?
Yeah, I'm curious to say how I felt without knowing how you felt about it. But
well, one of us has to go first.
That's true. I'll go first. I gotta say, I think this is a great horror movie. Personally, this is the first time that the slasher movie really got to me, and I think. And we should get into this a lot more.
Like it scared you?
Yeah. See, to me, with a horror movie, especially one that's definitely like of its genre, not really trying to break out into, it's challenging the genre in its own terms.
It's pushing it.
It's
pushing it. It's not challenging it, I don't think.
And so...
If anything, it's just challenging the boundaries of what's been shown before.
Exactly. It's challenging the boundaries within that genre, not trying to stretch the genre necessarily, if that makes sense. I don't know if it does or not.
It does to me.
So I feel like if it's really sticking to the genre, in a way... You don't really ask the question, did you like it or didn't you, or was it a good movie or was it a bad movie? You ask if it's effective.
Did it work? Yeah.
And for me, it was totally effective.
Yeah.
I felt like even from the first shot, that even the credits and the sounds, absolutely. I was like, oh man, I am in for something different here.
Yeah.
And I was glued the whole time. And there were moments where I was genuinely kind of just not only creeped out, but also there was the suspense element too. I thought the movie had a really good sense of tension and release, and just knowing how to build up that tension. And
not much release once it gets started.
True, that's true. It's pretty relentless.
That's definitely a good word for it.
Yeah. So that was my feelings. I don't know. How about you?
You're right. The question is, was it effective? It absolutely was effective. Would I watch it again? I would not.
No.
It was too much for me in a way that wasn't fun. Like, and we can talk more about this later, but so just generally right now, it is 100% effective, and it's one of the most masterfully made horror movies. It's not one of those things that you're like, oh, you can see how it was an influence.
It's still,
faded. It still is there. Everything Tobe Hooper did was unbelievable. And you're right, from the opening not credits, but like the setup thing where he talks about it being a true story, which is not true at
John
all.
Larroquette,
John Larroquette, and he said he got paid one joint.
Really?
To read it.
Good for him.
The film which you are about to see is an account of the tragedy which befell a group of 5 youths, in particular Sally Hardesty and her invalid brother Franklin. It is all the more tragic in that they were young. But had they lived very, very long lives, they could not have expected, nor would they have wished to see as much of the mad and macabre as they were to see that day. For them, an idyllic summer afternoon drive became a nightmare. The events of that day were to lead to the discovery of one of the most bizarre crimes in the annals of American history, the Texas Chain Saw Massacre.
But yeah, even
like,
that
as
too.
soon
just
as that started, here's the thing: my wife was like amped to watch it. She gets excited for horror movies around Halloween too, just like that.
Did she watch it
just
with you?
like you? She sat down to watch it. And pretty much after the opening credits, she was like, "I can't watch this," because
Really? She knew.
it's so creepy. It sets that mood unbelievably well. So for me, I'm with you. It worked, and it scared me as much as I can get scared by a movie for the most part.
Sure. Yeah.
I would still say, this is neither here nor there, but that The Conjuring still scared me more
Really?
than this movie.
And I haven't seen it yet. It's one of my
yeah, but
blind
it's another
spots,
one
but-
that doesn't push the genre, but is just completely effective within the tropes. But for me, just the type of violence wasn't something that I can hang with for too long.
Right.
Which it doesn't ask you to. I mean, it's a pretty short movie, like an hour and 23 minutes. I think, but-
That's what really took me back by it, was the tightness of the film in a way. I mean, it what, 84 minutes you said? Yeah, I think it's 84 minutes, so it's not even an hour and a half.
So that was, I mean, yeah, I think we both, you may have enjoyed the experience more than I did, but I think we're both at the same level of appreciation for what the film was doing.
Yeah.
I just didn't enjoy myself.
See, I feel
after
like
a while.
As far as slasher movies go, I feel like it took me right to the edge of what I can tolerate in that, and I was waiting for it to just go to the point where it's like, okay, I'm kind of checked out. I can't take this, or I don't ever want to see this again, or I shouldn't have to be exposing myself to this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it really does. I thought it's interesting. It kind of cuts at just the right time. Not so much in the tension, but just in what you're seeing, which I was kind of taken aback by how much you actually don't see in the movie, for how much everyone talked about how gory it was, and how just absolutely macabre and brutal it was. It actually, if I had to boil it down to what I think is most brilliant about it, is that it doesn't need to do that.
Right.
It is just as effective, if not more, than any of those Saw movies, or any of those other sort of hyper slasher movies. And you don't see,
the amount of blood you see is very minimal.
Yeah.
But at the same time, so for the violent acts, what you are seeing is minimal compared to what we've seen, in the last 15 years. But then there's also a part of it that is amazing at how much you do see, how much of it is in daylight, or how much of it is well lit.
Yeah.
And it's so good with its costumes, with its set design, that This thing in full daylight, the more you look at it, the scarier it is. Whereas with a movie like Jeepers Creepers or whatever, like as soon as you see the monster, you're like, okay. But like this movie, the more you see Leatherface, the more you see in that room with all the animal skeletons, the more you see of the dinner, the more you look at it, the scarier it gets.
Absolutely. I think full credit for that not only has to go to Tobe Hooper, but to the art director, Robert Burns, did all the art direction for that film. He's gone on, this was kind of like one of his, he wasn't really well known when he did this movie, but he's gone on to do a lot of other famous horror movies. And,
has he?
But, you know, and to think of the budget they had, and so much of what you're terrified by exactly is how it reveals to you, not necessarily the killing, which is also scary.
There's
it's the entire setting, the entire environment, the entire atmosphere of this movie is just creepy. Or
it's just deeply unsettling.
Yes, and unsettling is the way to put it. And I've seen the what I think is kind of interesting is that where I've seen the fingerprints of that in later things is not so much the horror genre. I'm sure it's there, but I've seen the effects of this movie so much in a lot of the more detective mystery stuff I've seen. Like, you know, I think this is all over like Seven. If you've seen True Detective, oh man, this is so much influencing True Detective, and so much of those where you need that sort of extra elevated scariness and atmosphere to bring up the I guess the stakes for the detectives in that. And that's not even in this movie. Right. There is no mystery really, or people seeking out anything like that. It's just straightforward, but it's that creepiness in the actual design of the movie that gets you.
You know what else I noticed? Ridley Scott said it directly that one of the influences for Alien were like 2001: A Space Odyssey. He named some other things, but then Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Really, in the way that Tobe Hooper handled the horror. And I watched Alien on Friday. I watched Texas Chainsaw Massacre today, and I can totally see it because unlike a lot of horror movies of the 70s, well, you know, any horror movie, but especially 80s and back. And this is something that my friend Jason brought up when we were talking this week, that the older horror movies, maybe when they came out, the music added to it, but for audiences today, the music telegraphs. And the music would start creepy, you know, minutes before anything actually scary was happening. And so the music was this is this overt clue to, you guys can relax. There's no scary music. Sure. You're fine. Scary music is starting. All right, you guys might want to start curling up, you know, maybe cover your face a little bit. There is none of that in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The whole hitchhiker scene is radio music. Right. The whole gas station scene, walking up to the house, going into the house, there isn't any music. And then the music comes in, it punctuates a scene. Yeah. Where she falls and there's music, but there's no proceeding, there's no buildup. Right. The sound is just terrifying.
It is. It's you say music, it's music loosely, it's brilliant, but it's more like just clanging. Yep. Like,
well, and what I heard is just, that's the recording of slaughterhouse equipment heard from like another room.
Really?
Yeah. So it's basically the idea was that the sound would be what animals were hearing on their way
while they're
to
waiting
being killed.
To be slaughtered. Yeah. Creepy stuff, man.
Yeah. Yeah. But no, so I'm saying I see that in Alien, which does silence and long shots so much, where you're just, Texas Chainsaw wasn't as silent and as still as Alien, but where you're just like scaring yourself because nothing is happening, but you know something's going to happen. And then I also thought of Michael Haneke with movies like Caché, or The White Ribbon, which isn't so horrifying, but almost any Michael Haneke movie where he holds on a scene that you are just looking at it for so long that you start looking in every corner of the frame and every inch to think like, what is he trying to show me? Sure. What is he trying to show me? Even if there's nothing, you start scaring yourself because you're like, something's got to be here. Yeah. And they do that a few times in Texas Chainsaw. And one of the... it's just creeping me out just thinking about it. One of those times is the first time we see Leatherface. And it's when Kurt, I think his name is, the first guy, the bearded guy.
I think you're probably right.
He, whatever his name is, he walks into the house, and the camera is pretty low from the doorway.
There's a lot of low shots. I don't know what the meaning of that really is, or if it's just Tobe Hooper.
There were a few times that the low shots were this girl's wearing short shorts.
There's that, yeah.
But this one, it was kind of low in the doorway that he had just entered from, and he was kind of looking around, and there's a doorway directly in front of the camera.
Yeah.
And you don't know what's going on. And then all of a sudden, just in a flash, Leatherface shows up and hits him with a hand, and it's just terrifying.
And there's not a lot of cutting. That's what's interesting about it, is like it's not like you would see today where it's like flash
close-ups,
cut to the full
edits.
close-up. Yeah, and then it's just like boom, boom,
Just
boom, boom,
watch
boom.
it happen.
And the music flows up. It's just like, no, you're just watching it. This is
you're a bystander. It's remarkable. It really is groundbreaking. And there were a couple other places where it's almost a misdirect. And I'm thinking of when Franklin is everybody's already inside the house they went to, that they like their grandpa's house, not the creepy house.
Right.
And Franklin, nobody can hear him. And he's just kind of wheels into this like porch area, and he's frustrated, and he's kind of looking around, and it just holds on him and holds on him and holds on him. And you're like looking around, like, what's going to happen?
And he keeps,
when is
like,
this going to happen?
sticking his tongue out and spitting for some reason.
Yeah.
But
well, and then that made me think, because that's what the hitchhiker did when they left him.
sure. Yeah.
And so I was like, is there something with the hitchhiker's blood that was on the knife? Did he somehow ingest that, and now the knife's missing? Like, what is this? Is there some like spirit element now that he's going to be? And then it never happened. It never pans out that way, but it still adds to this just
absolutely
tightening grip.
Actually, that's
around
a
the
question
viewer.
I was going to have for you: is how much did you even know about as much as you can say the plot, the way the movie unfolds before you watched it?
I didn't know anything.
I didn't know anything either, and I think that's for the better. But honestly, like, to me, I didn't know that most of the horror didn't even happen. None of the horror happens in that house, that grandpa's house,
That first house, yeah.
But when you are watching it for the first time, you're just as scared about them.
Yeah.
And that's not even that. What you see later that's very tame.
Yeah.
Extremely. It's just an empty, dilapidated
Yeah.
house, But for all I knew, that's where all the horror happens. Whatever this Texas Chainsaw Massacre turns out to be,
It was in this
we're there.
house or
We're there
whatever.
now.
Yeah.
And you're not
But
there
you're
at
not.
all.
No, you're not. It didn't create a lot of tension around the gas station,
True.
which is ironic, because at the gas station, the guy's like, "Oh, you don't want to go around people's," like, it sounds like a fairly sincere warning.
Yeah.
And then they go to the grandpa's house, and you're like, "Shoo, this is where it's going to happen." But then I say ironic because she gets to the gas station, you're like, "Oh, thank God."
Oh, yeah. And then it ends up being...
Nope. That's
where
even
it's
worse.
relentless. Is once the terror happens,
Yes.
it's just constantly there,
Yep.
and you think you're going to get a little bit of a relief.
There's
and
none.
There's no relief.
Once it starts, which is like, I don't know what, like the half-hour mark, 45-minute mark, and then there's just the rest of it.
Yeah.
You're just doesn't let up.
What's crazy is that you're still creeped out even before that happens. I mean, you're creeped out by the hitchhiker in the van.
You're creeped out by the people at the cemetery.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. It really is something.
I think it's a great horror film. I think it does.
No, it is.
I think it does belong in those lists
I
that
agree.
you see. I don't have any reservations about saying that. I'm kind of with you. Like, is this one I'm going to want to pop in like every year, like I usually do for, say, The Shining or The Exorcist? Because I love rewatching those movies. Maybe once in a while. I wouldn't mind watching it again sometime. But
maybe I wouldn't show somebody for the first time. If somebody, I wouldn't want that on my conscience. But also, another thing that makes it belong on that list is that the scariest movie mask of all time.
Yes.
Absolute. Like,
Again, it goes back to Robert Burns. He designed that mask. And you know what I thought was really interesting is I watched one of the making of documentaries of that. It was on the DVD I had.
Mm-hmm.
When he talks about the later Texas Chainsaw, and even like the very latest one, he was talking about the one that had Jessica Biel in it, the Michael Bay one, which one of our listeners said the best thing about that movie was the fact that Jessica Biel was in it, which is saying a lot.
Yeah.
Anyways, but he made a really good point. They showed a picture of the mask in that movie, and he said it looks like something an art director made for a movie. He's like, my whole goal with this movie was to just be real about it.
Make it look like somebody who didn't know how to make
Right,
stuff.
that you're talking like, and he's like, I did have to come up with a good skin sort of fabric, but the idea was like really try to get, as creepy as it is, get yourself in the head of this and what the resources they have, and stick to that. And
it's terrifying.
And even all those bones that are laid out, those are real bones. Like he had to, he dug them up from like veterinarian clinics and things that were like,
seriously.
Yeah, that armadillo at the beginning is a real armadillo that he taxidermied.
Oh my gosh.
This guy was dedicated, but he's so good at his craft. If that's what you're trying to get out of people is a real, authentic, just macabre scare.
Yeah.
I mean, he did it. He did it great.
He absolutely did. And again, with that mask, like everything else in that movie, it's not one of those things that you see it in full light. It's not scary anymore. Like one of the first scenes with Leatherface, it's a close-up in broad daylight, and it's so scary. I mean, that's like Nightmare on Elm Street. They'll show Freddy Krueger like anytime now.
I think that's the
it's
whole
almost
thing
like a joke if he's like in daylight. Like it's not a big deal. This movie, the more you see of it, the scarier it is.
Absolutely. I think that's why this stands apart to me as a cut above all those slasher movies that I didn't dislike Nightmare on Elm Street or Halloween, Friday the 13th. They were fine. I had a good time watching them, but this is really something else because those other movies, once you see the villain behind it or the killer, it's kind of up at that point.
Yeah, this movie cuts way deeper.
Not only, as you said, the more you see of that mask, but then Tobe Hooper he does actually pull some of those more traditional kind of scares. Like when that mask jumps out in the forest to kill Paul, I still have that image in my head. And it is just, that was like where I jumped.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh my gosh, it still gets, it really got to me. Interesting fact about that scene is, it's pretty low budget. So what they actually did was the crew and everyone had blood capsules in their mouths. And as he was cutting, because you don't see.
You mean Franklin in the wheelchair?
Yes. I meant Franklin. I said Paul. I meant Franklin.
Okay.
Anyways, but you don't see him actually getting cut.
No, not at all.
You see it from the back. But basically everyone was just spitting blood capsules. And so the blood you see flying is actually coming from just the crew's mouth as they're spitting blood.
Sally, I hear something. Stop. Stop.
And then on the flip side of that, when Sally is being chased and when they cut her finger, remember? Before the dinner scene, and then they put it in
the guy's mouth.
She was just like straight up, like she was totally cut up from running through the woods. So most of the blood on her after that is hers. And they couldn't get the fake blood to work with the knife, so they just cut her. Yeah,
I heard some story that the production of this movie was hardcore.
Yeah.
I mean, like people were like,
well, it had to be. That dinner scene is so physically intense.
Yes.
And that's where it got to be too much for me, where it was, just like constant her screaming.
Yes.
Just that's all. Like, I don't know what the script must have looked like for that like 20-minute period, because there's no voice other than her screaming. Nobody talks. And that gets to be too much for me, where it's just that relentless screaming, terrorizing, and then the torture of her. Again, it's not graphic technically.
No, if anything.
But it is so. That's when he goes to close up and he like does all those close-ups of her face,
eye,
to where it goes right to the white of her eye, and you're seeing the capillaries.
Yes.
And them like laughing, and then it's just. It was so
it's
torturous.
Disturbing. It is.
It's unbelievably disturbing, and that's where it moved from fun to me, and I don't know if I can fault the movie because whatever, it's the genre.
Yeah, and
it's certainly 70s horror. The female victim was insane. I haven't seen movies like Last House on the Left or I Spit on Your Grave. This one I think is even more restrained in that because like I Spit on Your Grave. This woman gets like gang raped and then gets her revenge. Whereas this, she's not victimized in any way that's special.
Right. Yeah,
Like,
if anything, I was actually waiting in the movie. This sounds terrible, but I was kind
No, I
of
get
waiting
it.
for a sexual molestation or a rape or something like. It's
Yeah.
not in there at all.
But the movie almost nods at that like idea that there's this sexual victim, this sexual violence to all this, because there's that part where she says, and it's so heartbreaking and disturbing, where she says, I will do anything, and they don't. That's not what they're there for.
Right.
They don't
They don't
care.
want that. Yeah.
Like the movie almost is pointing to these other movies and being like, your guys were so basic that the thought of sex would stop them.
Right.
Or these guys are so depraved, they're not even, their minds are so gone.
Right.
That they want nothing but to kill her.
Yeah. The other thing it's kind of a nod to is that Leatherface. I think it's actually a nod to like the monster in Frankenstein. That like he might be a bit of a half-wit, I guess. And actually, if you look at the way he kind of, in some of the scenes, not really when he's chasing, but in some of the scenes, like he's kind of lumbering about. And then there's a part where he actually, after he kills the girl, the meat hook, yeah, there's that. But that's not the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is after that happens, he's like looking out the window as if like, where are these people coming from? Like, there's a sense of like, there's almost a nod of like, okay, in that Frankenstein movie or that monster, you know, that whole movie was, you were supposed to kind of sympathize with that monster. And this is kind of saying,
they came into his home.
Here's a monster that you're supposed to sympathize in the same way.
You wouldn't have,
as Frankenstein.
Yeah.
But yeah, go ahead, try to sympathize with this character because this is how grotesque murder gets.
No, I know what you're saying. It's
there's a little bit of a parallel there.
Yeah.
But it's subversive in that. Yeah, exactly.
Can we talk a little bit about the idea of just horror movies in general?
Yes, I was actually going to ask you because you were talking about. I don't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry, but
no.
But you were talking about that the dinner scene was where you had to stop and you couldn't take that.
Mm-hmm.
But we know that there are tons of movies that.
Well, it's sadistic.
The sadistic stuff.
Yeah,
and just revel in that. What do you think the appeal is in that? I think I threw that out on our Facebook post.
You did. Well, one of our listeners, Thomas, he mentioned that he and his wife usually don't watch scary movies because they just revel in evil things. And he said that when evil is denigrated enough in the film, whether implicitly or explicitly, and there's a shining example of goodness, then they will sometimes give it a pass. Like if there's some, good over evil element to it, they'll maybe watch a horror movie for that.
Okay.
He felt like he said there's just too little time on this planet to spend your life watching people hacked up and screaming in pain. It's almost an insult to the people who are being hacked up and screaming in pain, which is a completely valid point. And so then you asked, why do people enjoy it? And he said there's a bunch of reasons. Some people just want to hack up people and they know they can't. He said some people, and certainly some movies like Evil Dead play well on the absurdity of it all. Some people kind of just like the more blood, the more it's like, oh, but that's just so crazy. And he said, and this might be almost a scarier reason for people to watch, is that they have no context for real graphic suffering in order to be properly disgusted by what's happening on screen. I mean, I don't know. That might be too much for you. You're making a face like he's being a little too lofty.
I have a feeling that there are people who have gone through terrible, gruesome things and might actually still like watching a horror film. I actually think he's making a lot of really good points with that. But I think there's there's more to it.
No, I do
than just that.
I do too. And he went on to say that people, will say adrenaline and catharsis and that sort of thing. But I think that it's an interesting point that some people are so far removed from violence and genuine terror or fear at all that they watch these and they have no emotional attachment to somebody dying or something. It's just totally like the thrill of it or the coolness of the kill.
Yeah.
Like there's no emotional stake or there's no compassion or empathy with a human life being taken. And granted, if you can't not empathize with a person dying on screen, then horror is never going to be your thing.
But in that genre, don't you?
Slasher film.
The movie doesn't linger enough for you to do that.
No, this one?
None of them. I mean, none of these movies really linger enough for. There's no grieving period in these movies,
Yeah.
So I'm not necessarily saying that that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying that the movie doesn't really open that up for you. And what I'm getting at is there is a little bit of empathy there, because it's the actual process of you identifying with the horror as the person's going through it. Like, it's a terrifying thing.
Well, that's true.
You know?
And that's where
I guess
the good horror movies, and maybe this one, the ones that rely on jump scares and then just cool, ultra-violent killing, that's where it gets dangerous and gray area to me, because you're not scared because that person is going to die. You're not scared because of the loss of life is, a threat. You're scared because, okay, what's going to happen?
Right.
And then it's the jumps. So when a movie can ratchet the tension forever and hold it, and you're still scared the whole time, and then there's little explosions of more terror, that's the better horror movie, and maybe one that I can understand a little bit more.
Yeah. I mean, this is where I come down on it. I've been wrestling with this because there's no denying it. I enjoy horror films. So I guess it's not a matter of like trying to figure out if I'm a terrible person for liking them or not. But it's more.
I don't think
he's saying that either.
No.
But I guess I am trying to nail down what it is we get out of them. And there's a therapist, Jeffrey Kotler, who wrote a book called The Lust for Blood, and it's all about why we as human beings love watching horror movies, why we love like watching serial killers in the news, that we're infatuated. Like, people like Jeffrey Dahmer and John Wayne Gacy, they get like the most fan mail. They get more fan mail than like celebrities do often. And the whole book is about trying to explain why that is. And I don't know. I think he makes a lot of different cases, but one of which is that we used to, as human beings, we used to be in situations where we had to be predators and we had to be prey.
Yeah.
And that is still on a biological level in us, that there is this piece of us, this part of who we were as human beings, that we were killers, and we also had to worry about being killed on a regular basis. And I mean, this is like, you go back to the times of like the gladiators, and that this blood sport thing has always been a part of being a human being. What do we do with that? I don't know. But what he's kind of saying is that the movies at least allow for us to kind of
satisfy it a little bit,
like, and just kind
methadone,
of that thrill-seeking element that just needs to be satiated once in a while. And take a movie like a slasher movie, you actually get to put yourself in the place in a healthy way, relatively speaking. You get to actually feel what it's like to be a victim. We identify with the victim, but we're intrigued and curious about the process of the killer. And the thought of the killer.
And that's one thing that this movie, there is nothing interesting about the killers. Like, there is nothing that you want to look at more. I don't think. Like, for me, I don't want to know more about their mindset, because there is no mindset there. Like, it's basic and it's murderous, and it invites you to look a little bit more closely, by giving you time with the hitchhiker, by pretty quickly giving you a full view of Leatherface's mask. Of you don't know it, but of seeing what happens with their victims early in the movie. And then just is like, it's scary. Like, this is not interesting. There's no backstory that we need to know. There's no mother threw him in the lake. There's no, like, this is just pure evil. Like, you want to look, go ahead. It's going to kill you. There's nothing that you can make it side with you. You can't do anything.
No, and I don't think that, especially in this movie, but in most slasher films, I don't think they're trying to get you necessarily to identify with the killer. Or
but I feel like people do. The sequels.
Well, even the follow-ups to Texas Chainsaw Massacre have that element where they do go into the backstory. I haven't seen any of them, but I did watch in that documentary that was on the DVD. It talked a little bit about the follow-ups and the sequels, and it goes into sort of the backstory of this family, and that's why I don't think I'll never watch any of those movies. It doesn't interest me, really.
I don't know. There's this phenomenon that I've noticed in comedies, like comedies that rely on cringeworthy moments, which I think there's a similar element to like those like moments in the British Office, or like that you're just like,
the tensions.
Stop it, but you want it to keep going because it's going to be funny. I think there's something similar to that in the horror genre.
That's a good point.
But the reason that I think the British office stayed brilliant and the American office tapered off, Parks and Rec tapered off, other shows have done this too, is that they started liking their characters too much.
Yeah.
So David Brent never got likable. He was always acidic and selfish to the core. Michael Scott in the American office became really likable.
Yes. By the end, he was very affable, and you just kind of wanted the best for him.
He was misguided. Like, he was socially awkward, but he was never going to make the selfish choice. He was always going to do something for other people. Parks and Rec, same sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when the shows lost their bite and became less interesting. In horror movies, you see in the sequels, like the Nightmare on Elm Street sequels, the Freddy Krueger's one-liners become more important, and he just becomes a joke.
Right.
And you've got Silence of the Lambs is terrifying, and then Hannibal and Red Dragon, and then they ended up doing a backstory, like a prequel book.
Hannibal Rising, is that what it was?
Yeah. And there was even a line in Silence of the Lambs that's like, this guy has no backstory. Like, basically, it was like, there's no getting to know this guy. It was sort of what Texas Chainsaw Massacre was saying in the first one. Like, there's nothing to this.
Why bother? Don't even try.
But they started liking Hannibal Lecter too much, and the movies got dumb and like boring. And I think once you start doing that with horror movie villains, and you start that sort of mindset that like you can boil this murderous person down to some jokes or some backstory or whatever, then it becomes the killing loses its realism and its urgency and any sort of emotional stake.
Yeah.
Which is where I think horror movies get dangerous, when it starts to completely desensitize and devalue and gets you thinking how funny or how cool or however, whatever it is, other than how horrifying the murder is.
Yeah.
I don't think Texas Chainsaw crossed that line. I think you are constantly horrified by these people.
Right.
I do think it maybe crossed the line as far as it crossed the line for me, what I can take.
Well, that's the thing, is I think that's an interesting point you bring up, because that's another thing that this Kotler guy who wrote this book brought up, is about this sort of continuum, the perfect balance between boredom and anxiety. And he's talking about horror films in general. He's saying that for some people, horror films, they just don't see the appeal in them.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't really even affect them, so they're just bored by them. So they don't get them.
Yeah.
Then on the other end of the spectrum, you have someone like maybe your wife. I know my wife is like this. She used to love horror films. She really can't watch them anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this anxiety where it's just like they know what they can handle, and they can't handle this, and it's going to affect them too much.
Yeah.
So they're not going to put themselves through
Oh,
that.
yeah. I definitely know people who...
But then there's somewhere in the middle where everyone else kind of falls. And especially if you fall kind of right in the perfect spot in the middle where you become sort of a horror enthusiast, it's just the people who enjoy that thrill-seeking element of it, and there's still that piece of control to it.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I think horror in some ways utilizes more than any other genre in movies, is they're made in such a way where, like, if things get too intense, it's actually sort of a function that we have where you can kind of not tune out, but you can, like, I know that I've done it, like, and I do it even in dramas, like if I don't want to get too teary-eyed, you know, it's that sense of, if you're really into a movie, you are losing control. And so, like, if you feel like you're losing control and you don't like that, you start to kind of not even tune out, but you maybe pay attention to something else. You pay attention to, like, oh, look at the cinematography here, or like, look at the lighting,
or like how ridiculous it is, or like start rolling your eyes at something.
Yeah. But these movies are made so that if you're willing to just completely lose yourself to it, and I guess on that Friday night with Texas Chainsaw, I was. But if things got too bad, there's always that thing, and I think directors know that it's there, where you can flip that switch if you want to, not necessarily walk out of the theater, but you can kind of look to the side, or you can kind of like look down for a while, or if you're with a date, you can kind of like,
I definitely checked Twitter while I was
you
watching.
can kind of think
today.
like, you know, how's my date feeling about this movie? Like, you can kind of purposefully move in and out of the movie, and that's that sense of control that I think is very important to horror movies, that, you know, maybe sometimes gets overlooked as far as when we're talking about what we can take and what we can't.
Well, this is a question I had while I was watching the movie, because and I was surprised at this, there was no moment of like 70s schlock or so bad it's goodness, which I'm not a fan of.
We know that.
There was no moment where I was like, oh my gosh. Because I'm pretty sure if there was, I would have lost it. The movie would have lost me. but it did maintain the don't go in there, don't go in there. But at the same time, the guy didn't have a reason not to, really.
Yeah.
Like there was no indication that anything was amiss. So like,
and the way that it really flipped it on its head is when Sally goes into the gas station. You're saying go in there,
finally,
get in there.
in there. Yep. Yeah. Because I think it's got more of a function than just a plot device. I know some people just use it as a plot device, but I also think there's something to the idea of the don't go in there. Like, what are you doing? Don't split up. Like that not only adds to the suspense and the fear, the plot line, like we need to find a way to get this person alone in the house. But I wonder if there's something about that tempers the experience so that you can feel the fear, but you can also feel safe in the knowledge that you wouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
Like that's part of the control maybe, or part of the governor on the fear that like,
yes. Yeah.
I would never have gone in that house.
Right.
Okay. I would not have split up to find the cat or whatever in Alien. Like I wouldn't have done that. I would be safe in that situation. It would be one of the most sadistic movies, I think, if it was just people. I mean, it would basically be like a massacre movie. Like it would be like a high school shooting. Like,
yeah. And I don't know if I want to necessarily. I mean, you know that some horror movies actually do have something to say as far as like, the culture or what's happening at the time around it. And I don't know if I necessarily need to feel like I need to pull a meaning out of Texas Chain Saw Massacre because I don't know if you're going to have. But like the way that movie ends, it's just absolute. It's just chaos. I mean,
chaos and like a lot of just luck.
Yeah. Chaos, luck, and by the end, she's just hysterical.
Yeah.
And like,
just out of her
it's
mind.
absolute lunacy at the end. I mean, you've got this chainsaw wielding madman, this girl who's like pretty much given up.
Yeah.
Like, she doesn't know.
She's running, but she knows that it's only a matter of time.
Yeah. And she gets into that truck, and it's like a mixture of laughter and screaming.
Yeah.
And that's just like nothing I've ever really seen.
It's insane.
It is. Again, it's just absolute lunacy. But then there's just something kind of like balletic about his chainsaw dance at the end. It's a beautiful scene. I don't know how to explain it.
It's beautifully lit. It's beautifully shot. It's, I
don't know what to make of that at all. I don't know.
Either.
And if anything, I just wonder if it's kind of a nihilistic sort of like, there is really nothing to get out of this. I love this. There's actually a line where Sally says, everything has to have a purpose, I guess. Like it's like that. She adds that, I guess.
Yeah.
And maybe that's supposed to be the thesis of the movie. Is like,
everything has to have a purpose, I guess.
Yeah. But like trying to put this movie in context, just read up on it a little bit. And it was saying that like this movie comes pretty much right after, The Summer of Love is Over, which ended with Charles Manson.
Yep.
And you've got like Night of the Living Dead came out and Easy Rider came out. And so you kind of have this movie being part of that new sort of cinema where it's kind of like, we can make movies wherever we want.
Right.
We can do them on location, however we want, and we can do whatever. We can make them about whatever we want. And when it comes to the horror genre, Night of the Living Dead was the first one to show that the horror was not from the outside. That like earlier movies like Invasion of the Body Snatchers or even something like Frankenstein, where it's a creation of somebody, like these monsters were created somehow.
Yeah.
And that really Night of the Living Dead, it was kind of in between as a zombie movie, but then Texas Chainsaw Massacre was the one that was saying like the real terror is in humanity. Like we are capable of this. Like humanity is capable of being just horrific.
There's just terrible people.
And the worst horrors, we can't always expect that they're going to come from the outside, that they're going to come from the Soviets. The real horror can come from next door or can just come from these rural backwoods in our country.
Well, and that's almost what the end of Easy Rider is too.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like you can be idealistic, but some dude from your country, like, just going to shoot you.
Yeah.
Right in the face. Yeah, that's really interesting. I don't know how much this movie had to say, but I think you could definitely see it as being a product of its time.
Yeah.
I
would have loved to have seen it originally, like in a drive-in theater in the 70s
dude.
when it came out. Nothing like it coming before. Like, I would have loved that. I really would have.
I don't think I could have done it.
And I was actually getting to the point where, because I had just watched the original The Omen earlier this week,
Mm-hmm.
and I was getting to the point where I was thinking to myself, okay, you know what? If it's an older horror movie, I guess I just have to assume it's just not going to scare me, and just assume.
That's what I was.
And
I was
just
banking on that, but I knew it would.
And then I was kind of like, okay, this proved me totally wrong. That like there are still movies that are 40 years old scare me just as much as the best horror movie today could.
Well,
you know?
because I knew it would. I knew it was going to scare me, because when I was looking for images to put up with our weigh-in section, I was like, oh my god, this is like, there were like all these pictures of Leatherface, and I was like, this is gonna be too much.
Yeah. Okay, so just to kind of wrap things up a little bit, it looks like, well, this was, I guess you could maybe call Gremlins a horror movie if you want to stretch it, but really this seems like it was kind of our first horror movie, and it was fun to watch it for this time of year. And
what a horror movie.
Good one to go. Yeah, go big or go home, I guess, is the way we do things around here. So I think we both kind of see mostly eye to eye on this, where it's like we really appreciate this movie, whether we necessarily would love it and give it to all of our friends for Christmas. I mean, I would, stocking stuffers, but you know. Anyways, if you guys have anything to say about Texas Chain Saw Massacre, please just let us know. You know all the ways to do it. Email us, hit us up on Facebook or Twitter, give us a phone call. CanWeStillBeFriends.net's the website, and you can get all the information about how to contact us on there.
Yeah, or what you think about horror movies in general, what place they hold in our collective psyches. Or
that is one thing I've been noticing on our website that I've been loving is we take, say our last episode, Braveheart, and the conversation doesn't just stop at Braveheart. We've actually been talking a lot about the genre and the idea of it. And so if we could do that with horror, with Texas Chain Saw Massacre, and just really explore these ideas more, I think that would be a lot of fun to do on our website. So please do.
And in keeping with that, we're choosing our next movie mainly based on the discussion of genre that we can have, because we discovered with Braveheart, well, we re-established
we drilled into the ground.
We firmly planted the idea that I am not a fan of the historical epic genre.
Sure.
And there are exceptions. That doesn't mean I don't like, I only like movies set present or future. But in that discussion, we kind of talked with Nate. Nate doesn't automatically take a shine to superhero movies. And so we are going to explore that. Plus, the new Avengers Age of Ultron trailer just came out, and I'm excited about it. It looks awesome. I really loved The Avengers. Nate, it was actually a superhero movie that you didn't hate.
It was fine.
So,
but it is true. I just don't tend to get super pumped up, excited about superhero movies in general at all. So, in fact, I don't think I've even watched the trailer yet. I should probably go do that before the episode.
You might as well. So we're going to explore the idea of why the superhero movie works for me, doesn't work for Nate, and why why Avengers was a movie that Nate didn't hate.
Yeah.
Even though it wasn't the superhero genre. What was different about that one?
Why it stood out, yeah.
So we want to hear what you guys think about the Avengers specifically. We want to hear your high-pitched squealing and excitement for the Age of Ultron trailer. And we want to hear what you think about superhero movies.
Should be a fun one.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it.
I am too.
Yeah, we'll watch the Avengers with us.
A little summer blockbuster to break up the fall sadness.
Get you out of your scared stupor after watching Texas Chain Saw Massacre.
Put a smile back on that face.
All right. Well, as always, thank you so much for listening to this podcast and for subscribing. And if there's anybody new coming to this podcast, thanks for checking it out.
Yeah, welcome.
And
nice
welcome.
to meet you.
Yes. And so we'll catch you next time in the next episode.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.